So I sometimes see these stories online of foreign men who have married Japanese or Korean women, and they talk about this tragedy in which the woman that they thought they knew, that soon after they get married or sometimes after they have children, they suddenly change into this other type of person who is extremely difficult to get along with, and the person that they thought they knew disappears. Now, this same phenomenon can happen to men who grew up in the culture too. But in my experience, a lot of this happens because the person involved is not expecting it and has no preparation for this kind of shift. And when you think about it, like what causes this sense that the woman has disappeared, quote unquote? Um, I think what's happening is that in any relationship, right, there's always these moments of give and take. There are these conflict moments when the person's reaching out and they're asking you as the other partner to somehow respond in a way that is going to resolve the issue that the person is bringing up. But if you didn't grow up in the culture, it's much harder to figure out how to do that response. Because the fact is that there's a different concept of masculinity and femininity, I think, in non Asian cultures, but in particular cultures that are not Japanese or Korean. And I'm lumping them together because I think there's a lot of similarity in the two cultures. I mean, there are clear differences, but when it comes to this, the patterns are somewhat parallel. I'm Japanese American and my wife is Korean, and I see the patterns, right? Like her style is different from Japanese style, but overall, it's very recognizable to me as someone who grew up with a Japanese mother and Japanese female relatives. In short, Japanese and Korean women are not weak at all. They're not submissive. I mean, it's especially in the Western sense of the word. Even though both cultures have very strong gender roles, those gender roles are not the same as they are in the West. So trying to map notions of femininity or submissiveness from a Western point of view onto these cultures is it just doesn't work. So in brief, like the stereotype is that when the relationship is young, then most Japanese and Korean women will come off as very feminine by Western standards. But as the relationship gets stronger, especially if it becomes marriage or motherhood, you're now in a different situation. And they will start to act more like their own mothers. For me personally, as a Japanese American with a Japanese mom, that's what I wanted. That's what I've always wanted. I never wanted a submissive wife. But despite that head start of having grown up in a culture where I've seen this pattern, so I was expecting it. It's still difficult, right? It's still difficult to learn how to navigate it. But if you've never seen it before and you are not expecting it, then I can see how it could become kind of a shock, and it could lead to the breakdown of the relationship. My advice for someone who's thinking of marrying someone who's Japanese or Korean is absolutely do not expect them to be submissive, because they are almost certainly not going to be submissive at all in any real sense. The interesting thing to me is that even when people watch, let's say, Japanese dramas or Korean dramas, they may get enamored of the culture, but you can see this playing out in these, even in these TV shows, right? The women in these shows are not, generally speaking, submissive by Western standards. So you would think that that would be like a clue, you know. Look at the moms in those shows. They are not shrinking violets by any means. They're usually quite authoritative, and that is the way that's actually representative of reality. It is easier to learn how to navigate that if you grew up in it. In my mind, the reason for this is a kind of ancient negotiation between the genders, between the sexes. Men have typically had authoritative roles in the outside world, and women were kind of ceded the authority of the household. In Japanese culture in particular, it's very explicit. In Korean culture, it is less explicitly stated this way, but nevertheless, I see the same pattern even in Korean households where, in theory, the man is supposed to be the head of the household, but in practice, it's often much more along the lines of what I've seen as typical in Japan. So, for example, in Japan, the traditional family, the wife controls all money, basically controls the bank accounts and all investments and so on. In most traditional Japanese households, the man doesn't even have access to the bank accounts. So, despite the strong gender roles, and maybe even because of them, most Korean and Japanese women, I would say, do not think of themselves as submissive and don't act that way in practice.